Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. Since I'm the only winemaker in the world that has captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine. So this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, where you can also hear on Spotify and all of your favorite podcast platforms, joins me. And together we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world, all while enjoying our favorite wines. I've got my favorite Casaro wine today, and it's our latest wine to be released. It's our Syrah, but we'll talk about that a little later. So you pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, make sure you share the show with your friends and other true crime lovers.
Hey, John, great to be here again with you. We are beginning season 2 with this episode. Very exciting.
Can't believe it.
Can't believe it.
The first season flew by.
It did. And we made it to the episode 8 magic number, John. This is episode number 9. So, we have surpassed many podcasters who've tried to stay in business here, but we're here again. And one thing, John, that just makes our show just a bit different. You're always looking for cases that are intriguing, interesting. We go international with some of these cases. Does this one really fit the criteria?
Well, on first blush, when I was approached to say, John, can you break down this case? You know, there's been a movie, there's been a television series, multiple podcasts on this. I went, I really don't want to tackle it. He's kind of a boring serial killer, and his murders were really pretty bland. And so I had to really dig deep into it to find something that was unique, right? That's what we provide, unique content that you're not going to get somewhere else. And as I looked more into it, what was intriguing to me was just his pathological need for attention during the crimes, after the crimes, while he's in prison. It never stops with this guy. And then it did have an interesting twist in that innocent people actually pleaded guilty to his murder and spent time in prison for it. And he got mad because someone else took credit for the murder. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating was law enforcement's perseverance on a couple of these cold cases. And you and I have talked about that in the past, and we've seen it over and over again, though, as technology keeps growing and expanding in DNA and genealogy, how we're able to solve crimes decades later. So for these reasons, I think, yes, it's intriguing, it's interesting, and we're going to have some fun diving in to the case of the Happy Face Killer.
So we talk about their early life. We seem to cover this in most of all of the cases we do. You know, so what did Keith Jesperson's early life look like?
Well, he hit on some of those key indicators that we talk about nearly every week. Matter of fact, it's unusual when you and I sit there and look at a case and go, wow, his early life was pretty easy and mundane. Keith Jefferson, though, grew up in British Columbia, Canada. His father was an alcoholic. His grandfather was abusive and violent. He was kind of treated as the black sheep of the family because of his size. He was absolutely huge. Matter of fact, he grew finally to 6'7", 225 pounds, but even as a teenager was way bigger than all the other kids. Like a lot of the killers, he was a loner, he was shy, and he misbehaved. And we found out later on that he actually enjoyed torturing and killing animals. And we discovered later on that he was not just abused and beaten with a belt, but actually shocked, electric shocked by his dad. So we do see some of those common precursors starting at a very early age with Keith.
Wow, 6'7", 225. I can only imagine when we start to talk about his victims, how intimidating he probably felt and looked to some of these women. The torturing and killing of animals, I was surprised to see that, typically, John, we see this early age, I think, and then it progresses to other things besides animals. But this guy actually continued this over the years into his teenage years, adulthood. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what were some other warning signs, as an adolescent growing up into teenage years?
Well, he started, as far as we know, torturing, killing animals at like 5 years old. Really, really young. I mean, sometimes we see it 10, 12, 14, 5, really young. As a teenager, we know that he severely beat animals, strangled them to death, and said his father was proud of him. He said that he fantasized about doing it to people, and that is very common, let me tell you, among serial killers, that they will torture and kill an animal and actually fantasize about it being a real person. Now, as an adult and father, he even enjoyed watching animals fight to death, and he would hang kittens. This is really going to get those cat lovers out there, Brandy. He would hang kittens from a clothesline in front of his daughter. So from an early age, we see how the father is kind of, encouraging him to kill and torture and strangle animals. And then when he's a father, he does the exact same thing. Can you imagine the impressions of a little girl whose dad enjoys strangling kittens in front of her?
I mean, no, I cannot. And I think to myself, I go back to the shocking of him, right? That a family member was inflicting on him, right? So pain. And then 5 years old, John, at 5 years old, they're holding kittens, right? They're learning what connection and love is as a child. And for him to already have that mindset at such a young age, that's just really terrifying. So we're already looking at the family life, how he's growing up, his personality, thinking it's okay to kill these animals. What other habits are you seeing so far with this?
Well, I want to stay on the animals for a minute because it goes back to another show we did. Remember the pig farmer and how violent he was and everything? But if I remember right, when he was 12, he came home, and the only real attachment that he had in his life was a calf that he raised, from right after it was born. And then he came home and found his dad had slaughtered that.
I know.
That calf, the only thing that he valued in his life. Now we have somebody that it's being reinforced from age 5 that it's okay to kill and abuse animals. And he does it throughout his life, and he does it into adulthood, and even when he's a father. It's
strange, John. It's strange behavior as an adult. Because typically, you go on, you either get a job, right? You do other things, you become, serial killers move on to people, right? They typically, the animals are like, that's a precursor of what's going to happen eventually, maybe. But for this to continue in his life and then to do it in front of his own child, again, I always say kids learn what they live and they will act on those things that they learn. So I'm not surprised by this, but just really unusual to see this in adulthood.
So Brandy, let me ask you, do you think he was modeling the behavior for his daughter that his dad modeled for him? And do you think he was expecting the same results? Was he almost training her?
100%, because I think a part of him felt on some level that if my dad's doing this and he's sharing it with me, some of this might actually be okay or normalized. Not that it is, and not that he ever got out of that mindset, but as a child, when you're looking up to the people in your life and you're watching what they do, you're mirroring their actions. I can't help but think he just learned it. He learned that this was somehow normal and okay.
And then taught it to his daughter?
Yeah, strangely, I know that's really hard to wrap around. I don't know the point of it. I think that's where I'm trying to wrap my head around is what was he then getting out of doing this in front of her? What reaction was he looking for out of her? And did somehow that connect him to his dad? Like, was that a connection, killing animals and enjoying it, laughing together? Maybe that was the time that him and his father were engaged together. So I don't know. But I do go to just the behavior and characteristics of a child looking up to that parent.
Yeah, I'm struggling with, did he feel that it was normal, or was it more sinister? Was he more training the next generation of killers? Not that his daughter ever did anything, but sometimes with these cases, even years later, we're trying to understand, and the first thing you learn when you're profiling these guys is there is no understanding, right? You
That's right.
take all of your morals and values and everything and everything that you thought you believed, and you throw them out the window and you start from scratch. But, let's kind of move on. So we've already seen some of these characteristics here: abusive parents, abuse as a child, antisocial behavior, obviously the animal torture, few relationships because of his size. We already said he was a loner and he was shy. He certainly, on every level that I can see, had no empathy or remorse at all. A very common characteristic with serial killers. And he obviously was fascinated with violence and sadistic acts, which are usually a precursor to predatory behavior. He has this need for power and attention, and it gets back to this. This is just an extreme example of a narcissistic personality that becomes a sexual predator.
So he's got all the characteristics. We've talked about some of the habits and the things that are already happening with the animals, but now we're going to actually get into some victims. John, how old and who was his first victim?
Well, he started, as far as we know, at age 10. He attacked another 10-year-old and beat him unconscious and said he wanted to kill him at age 10. So at 5, he's killing kittens. At 10, he's beating people unconscious. At 12, he holds another boy underwater until a lifeguard saved the other little boy. And at 12, he says he raped. Now, there's no confirmation. At 14, he said he raped somebody. We couldn't confirm it. We know that there's shoplifting from a very early age. And that at one point, and I found this just fascinating, he shot an arrow with an exploding tip at a teacher. I don't know where you get an arrow with an exploding tip, but he got a hold of it and shot at a teacher. So we see this violent behavior, predatory behavior, age 10, age 12, age 14, and continuing through his teenage years.
So starting very young, again, like you said, with being 5 years old, starting to kill animals, it's progressing. Exploding tip at a teacher. I mean, again, where do you get that? And not only that, John, I think you were the one who told me years ago when I interviewed you about the eyeball killer, don't try to get in their head, Brandy. You won't understand it. And, but it is just mind boggling sometimes to think like, how does he even think that's okay? But again, admitting at 10 years old that you wanted to kill someone that you were beating up. I mean, just really the signs and the red flags are everywhere. So what about high school? So eventually he grows into his teenage years. So what's going on in high school?
By the time he's in high school, he's absolutely huge. He's almost, reached his full height and weight. But he dated few girls in high school, really was a loner, really was shy, and really couldn't handle, I guess, the growth of his body and all of that. But then by age 20, right? 2 years after high school, he marries somebody in 1975, and they have 3 children, Melissa, Carrie, and Jason. He at that time tried to be a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer and was actually in the academy, but was injured in training and couldn't complete the academy. After that, he had to find a job. And so he went looking, and he found one and moved his family to Washington, where he became a truck driver. Bad
Here we
combination.
go.
Predatory behavior, sadist, no empathy, no remorse. And now he's a truck driver, so he can get any place, anytime, anywhere. And he really discovered that the new job afforded him the opportunity to move around and to kill without being suspected. Right? We've seen this before with these mobile predators as they traverse the country and drop victims off, pick victims up, kill victims, all different parts of the country. Now, a woman eventually called his house one time, and his wife suspected of him of having an affair, and they were divorced in 1990. And that might have been one of those triggers, right?
Yeah.
The divorce, the losing the children, the house, that type thing might have been the trigger to January 1990.
It's interesting because we see like some of these serial killers try to join the military or get a really good job. And he wants to be, in the Canadian police. And then this happens, right? Triggers happen. I mean, we know the mind is a very powerful thing. And now he's alone. He has time on his hands. He's a truck driver. And so eventually, January 21st, 1990, he graduates to murder.
Yeah, he meets a developmentally challenged woman at a bar. He takes her back to his rental house near Portland. He beats her, rapes her, and strangles her to death with his hands. And then he disposed of the body, but it was later found about a month later along the Columbia River. From the victim, though, he did take a souvenir and he gave it to his daughter. He also hid the victim's purse, presumably to relive the experience later. And we see many killers do that, right? We see them take souvenirs and we see them hide things so they can go back. They know where it is and they relive the experience.
Gives it to his daughter, huh?
Again, he's killing animals in front of her, and now he's giving her souvenirs from victims. And
Wow.
I just, that part is still mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Right?
So there was a murder and a cover-up. We talked about the fact that he didn't want people taking credit for his crimes. And interesting, John, we have covered this in more than one case of people being either admitting to something they didn't do or being convicted of something they didn't do. But there is a murder and cover-up, and he gets upset about it.
Yeah, so the young lady he took back to his apartment in Portland, strangled her, beat her, raped her, and killed her. Well, actually, another lady, Laverne Pavlinick, wanted to get out of an abusive relationship. She read reports about the murder and went to the police and said her boyfriend forced her to commit the rape and murder and then to dispose of the body. And although there was no physical evidence whatsoever, both Pavlovic and the boyfriend pleaded no contest to avoid the death penalty, and they were both convicted of a murder a year later that they never committed. So the murder was in 1990. They both pled guilty in February of 91. And it wasn't until 1995 that Jesperson admitted to killing Bennett and gave the police the location of her purse, the only thing the real murderer would know. Investigators were forced to go back, open the case, and release the two people that pleaded guilty to it because they didn't do it. Jesperson is the one that killed Bennett and was mad because other people took credit for his kill.
I mean, what an unusual thing for a woman to go forward, right? Admit to this kind of crime. And then the boyfriend pleads no contest, and neither of them did anything. I mean, John, that's bizarre. I don't know.
The
Very
woman must
bizarre.
have been, she must have been very believable, right? Her story,
Right.
she must have known enough details. Maybe the officers, jumped to some conclusions. Oh, wow, this matches the evidence that we know so far. Women do get forced in those situations sometimes, but with no physical evidence at all. And Jesperson admitted to being mad because they received the attention for his murder. So he wrote a confession on a bathroom wall of a truck stop and signed it with a smiley face. But you know what? He didn't get the attention that he wanted. So he wrote letters to the media and the police department confessing to the murders, right? Starting
Right.
with a 6-page letter to the Oregonian in which he released details of the killings. And he signed each of the letters with a smiley face. Well, this led Phil Stanford, a journalist who worked for the Oregonian, to dub him the happy face killer. So that's where the name comes from. And did he start signing these because he didn't get credit for the first murder? That's what I think. I
Yeah,
think he
I
was
agree.
so narcissistic. He wanted to sign him to go, hey, look at me. I'm the one that's killing these people and I want to get credit for it.
Well, and now he's writing letters, and now he's got a nickname. And I'm sure as a narcissist like he is, he's like, oh, I'm now the happy face killer. And again, that need for attention. So what is some of that need for attention, John, that
Well,
you saw in this case?
yeah, well, we've seen it, in several cases. Remember when we did the highway strangler, Brandy? He kept newspaper clippings in his van, right? In the glove box. He would keep clippings of the newspaper stories of his murders. And then the Purgatory Killer that we talked about not long ago, he not only followed the cases, he inserted himself in them and covered them for the media. Well, we've had other cases like, Rodney Alcala when we did the game show killer and he took so many photos of his victims, kept them in a footlocker, if I remember right. And
Wow.
even BTK, who turned himself in after decades because nobody knew who he was. Jesperson's need for attention, that narcissistic behavior, started with the Bennett case, but really it continued, I believe, throughout his murder spree, into prison, and now beyond with the attention that his cases got with podcasts like this and television shows and series and everything else. Unfortunately, I think that narcissistic behavior continues and continues to this day.
Well, he starts admitting to crimes, John, right? So he pleads guilty. Sometimes they're not even officially identified. He's writing a 6-page letter talking about the things he's done. So there was a woman named Claudia. What do we know about Claudia?
Well, we know she was killed in 1992. So you've got the murder of Bennett in 90. You've got the couple pleading guilty that didn't do it in 91. Now in 92, we've got what we think is the first victim, where she's called Claudia. Authorities still don't know her name. She was a white female between 20 and 30, never officially identified. He actually pleaded guilty to her murder in 2010.
Wow.
2010, 18 years later, he told investigators in 2023, finally, when he was giving information about the case, that he picked her up in Victorville. They had a fight about paying her. Apparently, she was a prostitute, and that he strangled her and killed her in his truck before dumping her body in Blight. So this is another scenario where he's in prison and finally admitting to murders uh, to kind of get credit for it, honestly.
Wow. Okay, so what about Cynthia Lynn Rose?
Well, now we're starting to see be able to profile the victimology, right?
Yep.
Bennett was a special needs girl. He picked her up, beat her, raped her, killed her, strangled her. We now see the first victim was strangled, white female prostitute, as far as we know, even though not officially identified. With the second victim in 1992, also in California, another white female prostitute, met her at a truck stop, gave her a ride. He strangled her. And again, we see that he took souvenirs and gave them to his daughter. So, from a profiling standpoint, victimology is really starting to emerge now.
Yeah.
And MO. Victimology, white female prostitute, meets him in or around truck stops, takes him somewhere. MO beats him, rapes him, strangles him, and dumps him in another city beside the road. So we're seeing he likes being hands on, right? Isn't that what he did
Right.
with the kittens at age 5? Isn't that what
Yep.
he did, with the animals? He was very hands-on. He's a huge man.
Huge. That's the first thing I thought about. Like, imagine the size of his hands. I mean, doing this to little kittens, right? Because we know strangulation is a very personal way to kill someone. You're looking in their eyes. It's not immediate. It takes some time to kill someone by strangulation. And so there's a thrill to some of that. There's an enjoyment to seeing the look of fear on someone's face. John, I have a question about the souvenirs, and maybe we can chat about it later. But
Yep.
did he admit to police he took the souvenirs and gave them to his daughter, or does she eventually come out and say that they were the souvenirs?
Yeah, I think that she turned over some of that to authorities, but I think he had actually admitted to it while he was in prison. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of how that happened, right?
Yeah,
There's a little confusion about, did she come forward
interesting.
first? Did he say, no, I kept some of these and gave them to my daughter, and then when approached, she, came
Wow.
up with them. Yep.
Wow. Well, and I think from a daughter's perspective, who knows what she was thinking when she received those things, but they were a gift from
A
her dad,
gift. Right.
right? And that's just so heartbreaking to think about that.
Dad
Okay,
was
so
on a trip. Dad brought me
yeah,
something back.
yeah. I mean, my dad was in the oil field my entire life. He constantly came home and brought us things from places. And I can only imagine, as much as he was on the road and then interacting with her again as a child, you're thinking, oh, great, a gift from my dad. And then knowing this, years later. Okay, we've got Lori Ann Pentland of November 1992, and this is happening in Salem, Oregon.
Yeah, these killings keep getting shorter and shorter, and we see that with serial killers, right? Again, victimology is staying perfectly the same from a profiling perspective. White female prostitute picked up at a truck stop, went to go have sex with her somewhere. He said she tried to double charge him, and when he refused to pay, she threatened to call the police. He then became enraged and, like the MO of the past killings, strangled her to death and then dumped her body. So, again, from a pure murder standpoint, very straightforward, not anything overly exciting about the killings from a serial killer perspective. He's finding his victims at the truck stop. Most of them are prostitutes, picks them up, argues with them. That seems to be a common thread. Argues with them, becomes enraged, and kills them, and then dumps them by the side of the road.
And so I'm thinking, John, as well, with I've noticed now twice he's blamed the victim and he has refused to do something. And so because of that, he has now, so she says, oh, I'm charging you. He says she tried to charge double, but was going to call the police. Well, that makes no sense because there would be no sense in that. And she's a prostitute.
Yeah,
That's the last thing they really want is police presence. So
what's the
just
phone call?
very
I am a
strange.
prostitute
Yeah,
and my
exactly.
client won't pay for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, victim blaming, pushing it away, almost like separating himself from what he actually did, which is very interesting.
No remorse, no empathy, anything else. And again, yeah, he's blaming the victim. It's their fault. It's almost like, well, I wouldn't have killed him if she didn't do that. If she didn't try to overcharge, if she didn't try to, right? So again, typical profile of a serial killer, no empathy, no remorse whatsoever, blaming the victim for what they did. And again, in as far as victimology, we see this a lot. Prostitutes, easy victim pool, transients, little family, little attachments. Many of these women, especially the ones that work at truck stops, travel from truck stop to truck stop, endlessly around the country, never really settling down anywhere. How would you ever know that they're missing? From a MO standpoint of profiling, we look at strangulation, which seems to be his, favorite mode of operation. But we don't see him. He doesn't need to bring any weapons. The women are getting into the cab of his truck willingly. And so from a geographic profiling standpoint, we know he's in California. We know he's in Oregon. We know he's going across the Northwest U.S. and across the U.S. in some cases. But really his geographic comfort zone is the cab of his truck. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, what sets us apart, not only the unique cases, but we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And today I'm drinking a glass of our Sorriso, which means smile in Italian. And that's what you're going to do when you drink this lovely Syrah. It's going to make you smile when you taste this medium-bodied, dry red wine. So take time to savor the notes of blackberry and plum and spices. And it pairs well with a variety of meats from premium steaks to briskets. So, as you know, there's absolutely no better way to enjoy a True Crime and Wine podcast than with a glass of Casaro wine. You can find them as always at CasaroWines.com, CASSARO.com, and you can order wine. We'll ship it to your door, and you can drink with Brandy and I a great glass of Sorriso, Syrah. Smile. Salute.
All right, John. So we talked a bit about the profiling, the victimology, and some of this. We talked about the fact that the safe place for him is in the cab of his truck. And maybe I was thinking his weapons are his hands, because this is a big guy. And so now that we know some of this victimology, we're going to get into another victim of June in 1993. This is Patricia Skipple. And John, the fascinating thing about this is what you just talked about: DNA, genealogy, facial reconstruction, and that, man, there's so many more cases that are going to be solved because of this evolution and the things that just keep progressing. But these are some of the tools they used in Patricia Skipple's case.
Yeah, and nearly every day it seems like there's a different technology coming out that law enforcement can add to its tool belt. And it's all it does is help us to give victims' families some peace of mind, assure them that the right guy is behind bars or put the right guy behind bars. Patricia was killed in June of 93, and they found her body, but again, could not identify her. This is someone that was picked up, was murdered, was dumped, didn't have ID, no idea where she was picked up. They knew she was a white female, about 45. Matter of fact, he called her Carla, didn't even know her name. He did strangle her to death. He did take souvenirs from her. But the officers kept working and they kept the case alive, and facial reconstruction was really done in 2022. So we hear about these cold case units from all around the country. I tell you, these guys do a great job in piecing these things together, trying to give the families a little bit of peace of mind. But it wasn't till 2022 that the combination of the facial reconstruction and putting the pictures out there was, somebody said, I think I know them, I think I'm related to them, and then using DNA technology, they finally identified her. And we've talked about this on other shows. This is just such an emerging field for law enforcement and gives us the ability to clear cases literally decades old we might never have gotten around to.
Yeah, that's right. And, I thought about the fact what you just said about giving families the answers, because we know that there are decades old cold cases that are now being solved. I mean, I think of like the yogurt shop murders, right? Austin never stopped pursuing. I think from a viewer perspective, looking on the outside, looking in, they were working this case. I think a lot of people felt that they had maybe let yogurt shop go to the wayside, but they didn't. And this is how they caught the guy who was using this kind of technology. So,
well, we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to do a show on Robert Brashers, and not just on the yogurt shop, but he was actually a serial killer. So that's going to be coming up. So thanks for that little promo, Brandy. But yeah, no, Austin certainly had egg on its face for wrongly convicting people. And there were folks that said, wow, we really messed up and we need to do something else. And finally, justice was served in that case. And like in this case, right? Some of these victims weren't identified for decades.
I know. All right. So we know we're talking about his MO, his victims, his comfort area being in his cab of his truck, strangling most of them, getting rid of their bodies, taking them from one place, dropping and leaving their bodies in another place. Anything else that we need to be profiling this guy about? Anything else we're picking up at this point?
Well, now we're starting to see with the latest murder, him really being mobile. Up to this point, the only victims that we knew about were in California, in Oregon, pretty much stayed on the West Coast. But with Suzanne Clelenberg, again, white female prostitute, 34, working at a truck stop, got in Tampa, Florida. So that's all the way across the country. And again, that's the thing about these killers that are so mobile. We may find the bodies and have no idea who they are for years and years. Yeah. We may not find the bodies until these guys finally decide to say, you know what? I'm not going anywhere. I've got cancer. I'm going to die. Let me tell you where a couple more are, or whatever. In this case, he met her in Tampa. She got in his truck. She began screaming. So again, some type of fight, some type of argument. But this time, he noticed that where he parked was too close to a truck parking area, and there was a security guard nearby. And so he says he strangled her with zip ties. Not sure how he did it, a little bit different MO, but still strangling up close, personal. And then he dumps her along I-10. So now we've got just another body out there. But to me, this is where it gets interesting, because we can kind of start to track the cold case investigation in determining who this victim was, right?
Right. So we've got Tampa and we've got the West Coast. So that is just already, to me, how can you even start to identify that if he just heads back to the West Coast and identifies someone that picked her up? Another thing I thought about, John, I don't know if this is how it plays out, but if I'm a trucker and I'm in my truck and I'm approaching a prostitute at a truck stop. I would assume a lot of the time they don't get out. Maybe the girl comes up to the window. I almost wonder if he didn't look very intimidating from the window view. Maybe they didn't know how big this guy was. Maybe there was some other, I do think about that because I think if I was approached by someone of that size, I think a part of me being just a female and I think intuition, it would probably be a bit intimidating. So I almost wonder if he purposely sat in his truck, lured them in, and never actually went out and just and talked to them outside of his cabin.
He might have, but a lot of the prostitutes, I've worked with them throughout my career, and basically what they tell me is money talks. And if you're going to pay, I'm going to do it, right? That's their line of work. And then unfortunately, I've heard it so many times where they tell me, I knew he was going to beat me. I knew he was going to handcuff me. I knew he was going to whip me. They know that up front because they say, I knew it was going to happen and I charged him more for it. So it is
John.
a ugly profession, to say the least. Now, with Suzanne here, we know that he dumped her alongside I-10 down in Florida. Landscapers actually found her in September of 94, but she wasn't identified for 3 decades. And I found it really fascinating that we've got an unidentified body in 94, and yet officers keep reopening the case. And in 2007, they did went to a forensic artist and said, can you give us a picture, some type of facial reconstruction? They also sent the remains off for examination to try to determine age, sex, ancestry, whatever. And in 2008, they sent samples to the FBI to enter them into their missing and unidentified persons database. Some of those remains were sent to a Texas company for forensic genetic genealogy examination. Now, that's a mouthful. But they created a profile using those DNA samples from the remains and actually matched it to a family member that was in the database.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And 29 years after her body was found, investigators went to Jesperson on the anniversary of her death, and he finally admitted to killing her. So all of that work, paid off in the investigators were able to give that family some solace in knowing that their daughter, family members' murder wasn't unsolved and that the murderer was in jail for life.
And John, what a wonderful thing for them to just stay on this, and to really find out and give the family answers and not just dismiss her. We see a lot of Jane Does, John, that don't get a lot of attention at all. They might have they might have something on them. Maybe there's a tattoo. They'll put some information out. But to do this and to go to the point of submitting the DNA, it's just fantastic work. So really glad to see them really stay on this one.
Yeah, we actually have law enforcement criticize, oh, well, she was just a prostitute. You didn't care about it. And here I think it shows that on both of these last 2 cases, investigators went above and beyond and said, we know how important it is to get closure for the family, right? Nothing else is going to happen to this guy. He's never getting out. They're not doing it to add to his sentences. They're saying, we want to clear these cases. All right, Brandy, I have a big announcement today. Our true crime lovers have been asking about this, and we told you a couple of podcasts ago that we finally got it launched, our True Crime and Wine store with all of our logo items, t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. It's called shoptruecrime.com, and you can get hoodies, t-shirts, bookmarks, tumblers, phone cases, wine glasses, yes, much more at shoptruecrime.com. It's open for business. Visit us online, pick out your favorite merch, or get it for your favorite true crime lover. I actually went and purchased some items right off of the site and put them in the winery and offered them to folks that come in to our tasting room. So you can now buy items in the tasting room or at shoptruecrime.com. Check out all of our logoed merchandise.
So we have another victim, another prostitute that's killed in Wyoming. Her name is Angela May. So let's talk about Angela.
Yeah, and again, his MO is changing. Like most serial killers, he's evolving. He's on the move, right? We saw the first kills in California and Oregon. Then he went to Florida. We found some bodies down there in Florida. Now he meets somebody in Washington in January of 95. He takes her to Wyoming where he kills her, but then he dumps her body in Nebraska. Is he now starting to fear authorities are going to catch up with him? Is he starting to get paranoid? A lot of times we see that about these killers. They feel more confident, more confident, more confident as they evolve, but then they start to devolve, right? And all of a sudden, it's almost like, oh my gosh, what's going on? We don't know what's going on in his head, but now he's not in a confined area on the West Coast. He all the way down to Florida, back to Washington, over to Wyoming, and now dumping the latest victim in Nebraska.
I wonder if you're right about that. Is he getting nervous? Is he thinking that he has to cross state lines and that there's some benefit to him doing that and putting the victim somewhere else? Is his route just taking him through these areas? And there's really no rhyme or reason to it. So yeah, I am thinking about all of that. But we have is Julianne a girlfriend, a friend of his? Do they know each other? What about Julianne?
Yeah, again, now his MO is changing or he's devolving, right?
Right.
As we see with serial killers. Julianne wasn't a prostitute as far as we know. White female, 41, was apparently his girlfriend. But then they got into a fight, same pattern that we've seen with the other women, when she told him she was just using him for his money. He apparently gagged her with duct tape, something different again, raped her and strangled her, and murdered her in Washington in 1995. So now we have a victim that's close to him. And anytime you have that, you're getting close to catching a killer.
Okay. I really like that statement. Can you tell me and the listeners why?
Well, now we've got a victim that is identifiable, right? The
Okay.
other women were prostitutes, easy targets, victim pool, transient, no known family. Now we've got somebody we can say, this is where she lived, this is where she worked, this is what she did, this was his girlfriend for at least a time, according to him. And so now there's a tie. Matter of fact, police actually questioned him in March of 95, but release him. But he thinks he's about to be arrested and given the death penalty. He tries to kill himself twice in 1 week. I've heard this so many times. These guys, honestly, they know how to kill. They've been killing. They know how to kill. And to me, it's almost like, oh, woe is me. I'm going to try to kill myself. Feel sorry for me. We've seen it over and over. He tries to do it apparently twice, doesn't do it. Oh my gosh. He turns himself in and confesses to Julie's murder because he thinks it's going to gain him leniency. Oh, I did it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to kill myself. Usually these are very feeble attempts at killing themselves.
You know, you're so right about that. They kill. If they wanted to actually commit suicide, they could probably do it and know how to do it. Which is interesting too, of like, whether or not, so I go back to the letters, I go back to his confessions, I go back to wanting the attention, telling the police, you know, again, blaming the victims, but then becoming the victim himself, right? Woe is me, I tried to take my life twice, and now I'm confessing to this murder. And so is he just grasping for straws here? I mean, does he know he's going down and he's just doing everything he can?
I think he's devolving. I've seen it before with other serial killers. He's losing it. He's getting paranoid. I think you saw that in his cross-country transit, picking up a girl in one state, killing her in another, dumping her in another. He didn't do that in the beginning. I think he's absolutely losing it, and something led him to believe that police were hot on his trail. They actually weren't. They didn't have enough evidence at the time to arrest him, and yet he confessed to the murder thinking, if I don't, they're going to arrest me and they're going to kill me. Kind of a coward, right? He's a coward. He doesn't even go through with killing himself. And then he doesn't want to face the death penalty. So he's going to admit to the murder. And we find out later the murders really went from 1990 all the way up through 1995 and included a number of the women that we talked about. During his trial, he admitted to multiple homicides, and it led investigators to reopen up some of the cases. That's how some of those cases really evolved from cold cases when they started going back and looking, wait a minute, we had a body here. Could that have been him? We had a body here that was unidentified. Could it be him? He admitted to killing a bunch of people, but later recanted it and said, no, it was just 8.
Hmm. 8
Maybe,
to 160, maybe. I mean, that was what he claimed, was 160 victims.
Yeah, he
And
claimed at one point 160. Again, is that narcissistic, look at me, look at what I did. Oh, I want to be known for this. But when they went to him and said, we got evidence of 8, we don't know about a whole lot more. Now, as with other serial killers, could there have been more? Yes. The time period over 5 years for 8 victims is very spread out, especially since the profile of the victims, the profile of the crime scenes, and the profile of the killer, the MO, all matched, right, during that time. So would I think that there's more victims somewhere? Certainly, yes. Do I think there was 160? I think that was his need for attention. He was convicted in 1996 in Oregon and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. In 2009, after they finally had, the other victim identified, he was indicted and extradited back to California and convicted and sentenced to a 4th life imprisonment. So he's not going out. And again, kudos to law enforcement for reopening some of those cases and tying them to it.
absolutely. And the fact that he was given these life sentences, I mean, that's great to see as well. And, I know it wasn't all 8 that, we know, John, that not all of the victims, they can't be tried for every single one. Some of the time it takes a lot of money, a lot of resources to do that in the criminal justice system, but they've got him on 4 life sentences and securing the fact that he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, in some jurisdictions just simply say, yes, for time and taxpayer money, he's going to die in prison. If we really can't tie him to it, from a prosecution level, we can maybe reach out to the family and say, we believe he's probably good for this. Although that may be little solace at that point. But here, Brandy, to kind of wrap it up, was just a very narcissistic killer. He wanted the attention, and when he didn't get it, not only did he sign his murders with a happy face, he wrote to the media, he wrote to the newspapers and said, guys, look at me, I did this. And he got upset when other people took the fall for one of his murders. So when it comes to narcissistic, no empathy, no remorse, he certainly fit the typical serial killer profile. And I think that's why it was significant to highlight it on our podcast. I know that there's lots of television shows out there. There's lots of series. You and I have watched them. Some are good, some aren't good. Some tell portions of the story. But I think, Brandy, you and I really delve into the profiling of these guys, their crimes, and their victims. And hopefully, our audience is learning a little bit more each time about some of these most horrific murderers that we have. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, at JJ True Crime and Wine. And you can sign up for our True Crime and Wine Wine Club at CasaroWines.com so that each week you can profile the killers along with Brandy and I as you enjoy a glass of wine. Now, I think that wraps up the business for today. And I want to thank, of course, my co host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey. And as always, our producer, Lauren Bezzo, back in the Corsicana Command Center for making the show possible. And we'll see you on the next episode as we present Ed Gein, the original monster. Yeah, the guy that inspired Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the hugely popular Silence of the Lambs. I'm John Matthews. Thank you for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salud.